Moral Insanity by Charles Finney. The heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live. Ecclesiastes 9:3. The Bible often ascribes to unconverted men one common heart or disposition. It always makes two classes, and only two, of our race, saints and sinners. The one class converted from their sin and become God's real friends, the other remaining his unconverted enemies. According to the Bible, therefore, the heart in all unrenewed men is the same in its general character. In the days of Noah, God testified that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Observe, he speaks of the thought of their heart as if they had one common heart, all alike in moral character. So by Paul, God testifies that the carnal mind is enmity against God, testifying thus not of one man or of a few men, but of all men of carnal mind. So in our text, the phraseology is expressive. The heart of the sons of men is full of evil, as if the sons of men had but one heart, all in common, and this one heart were full of evil. You will notice this affirmation is not made of one or two men, nor of some men merely, but of the sons of men, as if of them all. 1. But what is intended by affirming that madness is in their heart while they live? This is not the madness of anger, but of insanity. True, sometimes people are mad with anger, but this is not the sense of our text. The Bible, as well as customary speech, employs this term, madness, to express insanity. This we understand to be its sense here. Insanity is of two kinds, one of the head, the other of the heart. In the former, the intellect is disordered. In the latter, the will and voluntary powers. Intellectual insanity destroys moral agency. The man intellectually insane is not for the time a moral agent. Moral responsibility is suspended because he cannot know his duty and cannot choose responsibly as to doing or not doing it. True, when a man makes himself temporarily insane, as by drunkenness, the courts are obliged to hold him responsible for his acts committed in that state. But the guilt really attaches to the voluntary act which creates the insanity. A man who gets intoxicated by intelligently drinking what he knows is intoxicating must be held responsible for his acts during the ensuing intoxication. The reason of this is that he can foresee the danger and can easily avoid it. The general law is that while the intellect retains its usual power, so long moral obligation remains unimpaired. Moral insanity, on the other hand, is will madness. The man retains his intellectual powers unimpaired, but he sets his heart fully to do evil. He refuses to yield to the demands of his conscience. He practically discards the obligations of moral responsibility. He has the powers of free moral agency, but persistently abuses them. He has a reason which affirms obligation, but he refuses obedience to its affirmations. In this form of insanity, the reason remains unimpaired, but the heart deliberately disobeys. The insanity spoken of in the text is moral, that of the heart. By the heart here is meant the will, the voluntary power. While the man is intellectually sane, he yet acts as if he were intellectually insane. It is important to point out some of the manifestations of this state of mind. Since the Bible affirms it to be a fact that sinners are mad in heart, we may naturally expect to see some manifestations of it. It is often striking to see how perfectly the Bible daguerreotypes human nature. Has it done so in reference to this point? Let us see. Who are the morally insane? Those who, not being intellectually insane, yet act as if they were. For example, those who are intellectually insane treat fiction as if it were reality, and reality as if it were fiction. They act as if truth were not truth, and as if falsehood were truth. Every man knows that insane people actually follow the wild dreams of their own fancy, as if they were the most stern reality and can scarcely be made to feel the force of anything truly real. So men, in their sins, treat the realities of the spiritual world as if they were not real, but follow the most empty phantoms of this world as if they were stern realities. They also act as if self were of supreme importance, and everything else of relatively no importance. Suppose you were to see a man acting this out in common life. He goes round day after day, assuming that he is the supreme God, and practically insisting that everybody ought to have a supreme regard to his rights, and comparatively little or no regard for other people's rights. Now, if you were to see a man saying this and acting it out, would you not account him either a blasphemer or insane? Observe now the wonderful fact that while wicked men talk so sensibly as to show that they know better, yet they act as if all this were true, as if they supposed their own self-interest to be more important than everything else in the universe, and that God's interests, and rights even, are nothing in comparison. Practically every sinner does this. It is an essential element in all sin. Selfish men never regard the rights of anybody else, unless they are, in some way, linked with their own. If wicked men really believed their own rights and interests to be supreme in the universe, it would prove them intellectually insane, and we should hasten to shut them up in the nearest madhouse. But when they show that they know better, and yet act on this groundless assumption in the face of their better knowledge, we say, with the Bible, that madness is in their hearts while they live. Again, see this madness manifested in the relative estimate of time and of eternity. His whole life declares that, in his view, it is by far more important to secure the good of time than the good of eternity. Yet, if a man should reason thus, should argue to prove it, and should soberly assert it, you would know him to be insane, and would help him to the madhouse. But suppose he does not say this, dares not say it, knows it is not true, and yet constantly acts it out, and lives on the assumption of its truth. What then? Simply this: he is morally mad. Madness is in his heart. Now precisely this is the practice of every one of you who is living in sin. You give the preference to time over eternity. You practically say, "Oh, give me the joys of time. Why should I trouble myself yet about the trivial matters of eternity?" In the same spirit, you assume that the body is more than the soul. But if a man were to affirm this and go round trying to prove it, you would know him to be insane. Oh, if he were a friend of yours, how your heart would break for his sad misfortune, reason lost. But if he knows better, yet practically lives as if it were even so, you only say he is morally insane. That is all. Commentary. What is Charles Finney preaching about here? He's preaching about what they call practical atheism. That was an expression that was used before Charles Finney. Practical atheism, I think, was preached against by Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, and Wesley as well. And basically, it's not a person that intellectually rejects the existence of God, but for all practical purposes, they live as if there is no God. In other words, they do not walk in faith. They do not live by faith. They don't live by faith in the Bible. They don't live by faith in the gospel. They put God out of their minds by choice and continue to focus on natural, time-bound things like business and education and stuff like that. They do that. They put God out of their minds, and then they only think of God and eternal things, say, when they're 80 years old. And their hearts are about as spiritually mature as a toddler. Suppose you see a man destroying his own property, not by accident or mistake, but deliberately, injuring his own health, also as if he had no care for his own interests. You might bring his case before a judge and sue out a commission of lunacy against him, under which the man's goods should be taken out of his own control and he be no longer suffered to squander them. Yet in spiritual things, wicked men will deliberately act against their own dearest interests. Having a price put into their hands to get wisdom, they will not use it. Having the treasures of heaven placed within their reach, they do not try to secure them. With an infinite wealth of blessedness proffered for the mere acceptance, they will not take it as a gift. Indeed, how plain is it? How plain it is that if men were to act in temporal things as they do in spiritual, they would be pronounced by everybody insane. Any man would take his oath of it. They would say, only see, the man acts against his own interests in everything. Who can deny that he is insane? Certainly sane men never do this. But in moral questions, wicked men seem to take the utmost pains to subvert their own interests and make themselves insolvent forever. Oh, how they beggar their souls when they might have the riches of heaven. Again, they endeavor to realize manifest impossibilities. For example, they try to make themselves happy in their sins and their selfishness, yet they know they cannot do it. Ask them, and they will admit the thing is utterly impossible, and yet, despite of this conviction, they keep up the effort perpetually to try, as if they expected by and by to realize a manifest impossibility. Now, in moral things, it may not strike you as specially strange, for it is exceedingly common. But suppose in matters of the world you were to see a man doing the same sort of thing, what would you think of him? For example, you see him working hard to build a very long ladder, and you ask him what for. He says, I am going to scale the moon. You see him expending his labor and his money with the toil of a life to get up a mammoth ladder with which to scale the moon. Would you not say he is certainly insane? For unless he were really insane, he would know it to be an utter impossibility. But in spiritual things, men are all the time trying to realize a result at least equally impossible, that of being happy in sin, happy with a mutiny among their own constitutional powers, the heart at war against reason and conscience. The pursuit of happiness in sin is as if a man were seeking to bless himself by mangling his own flesh, digging out his own eyes, knocking in his teeth. Yet men as really know that they cannot obtain happiness in sin and selfishness, as they know they cannot ensure health and comfort by mutilating their own flesh and tearing their own nerves in sunder. Doing thus madly what they know will always defeat and never ensure real happiness, they show themselves to be morally insane. Commentary. Wow, that was graphic. That's a good quote, Finney. And what is he doing here? Notice how he says, the pursuit of happiness in sin. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It seems to me that he is making observations about republicanism. Republicanism. Okay? And before you jump right into communism as the opposite view, okay, no. It's Bible versus the world here. He's saying, look, these people are secularist, political capitalists. And they think more highly of the Bill of Rights that says life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, American dream, than they do of the Holy Bible, which says deny yourself and follow Christ. Another manifestation of intellectual insanity is loss of confidence in one's best friends. Often this is one of the first and most painful evidences of insanity. The poor man will have it that his dearest friends are set to ruin him. By no amount of evidence can he be persuaded to think that they are his real friends. Commentary. Yeah, I've run into this as I've grown up. As I got older and older, I saw that that's how men kind of develop in in America. That's how they develop. They don't trust anybody but themselves looking out for number one. It's republicanism. It's Republican ideology setting in. That's what it is. And you see, when you're a teenager, right, generally speaking, you're apolitical. You're politically indifferent. All you care about is camaraderie with your friends, right? And you might carry that attitude somewhat into your 20s. But when you reach your 30s and 40s, republicanism starts to set in, or alternative, similar, but different ideologies set in. And the person is totally socially inept. All they do is focus on their wife and kids. Because republicanism teaches people self-interest and competition. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, it teaches them. It's an assumed, embedded in cultural ideology. And it's completely anti-scriptural. Cuts right into the heart of koinonia, which is the Greek word for Christian fellowship. Just so sinners in their madness treat God. While they inwardly know he is their real friend, yet they practically treat him as if he was their worst enemy. By no motives can they be persuaded to confide in him as their real friend. In fact, they treat him as if he were the greatest liar in the universe. Wonderful to tell, they practically reverse the regard due respectively to God and to Satan, treating Satan as if he were God, and God as if he were Satan. Satan they believe and obey, God they disown, dishonor, and disobey. How strangely would they reverse the order of things? They would fain enthrone Satan over the universe. Giving him the highest seat in heaven, the almighty and holy God, they would send to hell. They do not hesitate to surrender to Satan the place of power over their own hearts, which is due to God only. Commentary. Do you realize what he's saying here? He's saying that Republicans are into Satanism in some way, shape, or form. Because that's what Satanism is. It is spiritual selfishness, seeking demonic power to empower you in selfishness. That's what Satanism is. That's what Satanism is. Do what thou wilt. That's the Satanist mantra. And he's saying Republicans are basically Satanists. That's what he's saying. Now, is Republicanism compatible with biblical Christianity? Well, if you augment it in some aspects, yeah, like voting against gay marriage or voting against abortion. If you augment it in some aspects, yeah, you can make it compatible with biblical Christianity. In some aspects you can. But if you embody 100% Republican values, you're a Satanist. You are a Satanist because the people in the Godfather movies are Republicans. Or were you not paying close enough attention? Lies, deceit, deception, selfishness, cruelty, competition, and greed as an actual legitimate motivation for hard work, and cruelty as a method of problem solving and getting rid of people. Those are Wealth of Nation, Adam Smith's Republican values. That's republicanism and capitalism. It's Satanism. It's Satanism. It's just a secularized form of it. It's do what thou wilt. It's Satanism. Okay? And that's what Finney's saying. He equates it with Satanism. He's not coming out and using words, but he's basically saying republicanism or capitalism or whatever you want to call it is Satanism. That's what it is. You couldn't ask for a more anti-biblical, anti-Christian belief system or value system. I have already noticed the fact that insane people treat their best friends as if they were their worst enemies, and that this is often the first proof of insanity. If a husband, he will have it that his dear wife is trying to poison him. I have a case in my recollection, the first case of real insanity I ever saw, and for that reason perhaps it made a strong impression on my mind. I was riding on horseback, and coming near a house, I noticed a chamber window up and heard a most unearthly cry. As soon as I came near enough to catch the words, I heard a most wild, imploring voice. Stranger, stranger, come here. Here is the great whore of Babylon. They are trying to kill me. They will kill me. I dismounted, came up to the house, and there I found a man shut up in a cage and complaining most bitterly of his wife. As I turned towards her, I saw she looked sad, as if a load of grief lay heavy on her heart. A tear trembled in her eye. Alas, dear husband was a maniac. Then I first learned how the insane are wont to regard their best friends. Now, sinners know better of God and of their other real friends, and yet they very commonly treat them in precisely this way, just as if they were to go into the places of public resort and lift up their voices to all bystanders. Hallo there, all ye, be it known to you. The great God is an almighty tyrant. He is not fit to be trusted or loved. Now, everybody knows they treat God thus practically. They regard the service of God, religion, as if it were inconsistent with their real and highest happiness. I have often met with sinners who seem to think that every attempt to make them Christians is a scheme to take them in and sell them into slavery. They by no means estimate religion as if it came forth from a God of love. Practically, they treat religion as if, embraced, it would be their ruin. Yet in all this, they act utterly against their own convictions. They know better. If they did not, their guilt would be exceedingly small compared with what it is. Another remarkable manifestation of insanity is to be greatly excited about trifles and apathetic about the most important matters in the universe. Commentary. Yeah, that's what the Pharisees were like. I just went over this in the book of Matthew, how Jesus and the apostles were gleaning on the Sabbath, taking corn kernels off of the edge of a field and having a snack, which was totally legal to do that back then. And some insane Pharisees came up to them and said, "You're doing work on the Sabbath. That's a sin." And then Jesus said, "No, it's not a sin. No, it's not a sin. Where are you getting this from?" Right? Taking a major issue, which the fourth commandment says to rest and worship on the Sabbath, right? And creating corn kernel rules for the Sabbath. If you so much as pluck a corn kernel, you're doing work. That's so ridiculous. And so Finney says, another remarkable manifestation of insanity is to be greatly excited about trifles and apathetic about the most important matters in the universe. In other words, a Pharisee could very well look at porn, masturbate, commit fornication and adultery, and ask God for forgiveness. But harshly criticize a person for deciding not to go to Disney World because there's so many gay people there. Suppose you were to see a man excited about straws and pebbles, taking unwearied pains to gather them into heaps and store them away as treasures. Yet when a fire breaks out around his dwelling and the village is in flames, he takes no notice of it, feels no interest, or people may die on every side with the plague, but he heeds it not. Would you not say he must be insane? But this is precisely true of sinners. They are almost infinitely excited about worldly good, straws and pebbles, compared with God's proffered treasures, but oh, how apathetic about the most momentous events in the universe. The vast concerns of their souls scarcely stir up one earnest thought. If they did not know better, you would say, certainly their reason is dethroned. But since they do know better, you cannot say less than that they are morally insane. Madness is in their heart while they live. The conduct of impenitent men is the perfection of irrationality. When you see it as it is, you will get a more just and vivid idea of irrationality than you can get from any other source. You see this in the ends to which they devote themselves, and in the means by which they employ to secure them. All is utterly unreasonable. An end madly chosen, sought by means madly devised. This is the life history of the masses who reject God. If this were the result of wrong intellectual judgments, we should say at once that the race have gone mad. Bedlam itself offers no higher evidence of intellectual insanity than every sinner does of moral. You may go to Columbus and visit every room occupied by the inmates of the lunatic asylum. You cannot find one insane person who gives higher evidence of intellectual insanity than every sinner does of moral. If Bedlam itself furnishes evidence that its Bedlamites are crazy intellectually, so does every sinner that he is mad morally. Sinners act as if they were afraid that they should be saved. Often they seem to be trying to make their salvation as difficult as possible. For example, they all know what Christ has said about the danger of riches and the difficulty of saving rich men. They have read from his lips, "How hardly shall they that have riches enter into the kingdom of God." It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. This they know, and yet how many of them are in mad haste to be rich? For this end, some are ready to sacrifice their conscience, some their health. All seem ready, deliberately, to sacrifice their souls. How could they more certainly ensure their own damnation? Now, I really like how Finney used the expression, the danger of riches. That is a John Wesley sermon title. Clearly, you can see he's drilling into capitalism and republicanism here. And he's saying, guys, you're going to go to hell if you continue to persist in this practical atheism, capitalism, republicanism. It's a combo. It's a combo. There's no real faith in God. There's no real divine intervention. There's no prayer life. There's no reading of the Bible. There's no faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ to get it right. There's no belief in hell. There's no fear of God. There's no divine intervention. There's no seeking after the Spirit of God. It's just practical, atheistical, capitalistic republicanism. And he's saying, you're going to go to hell. And you've been sufficiently warned by God in the Bible, and you still go on. You're a morally insane person. Thus they regard damnation as if it were salvation, and salvation as if it were damnation. They rush upon damnation as if it were heaven, and flee salvation as if it were hell. Is this exaggeration? No. This is only the simple truth. Sinners press down the way to hell as if it were the chief good of their existence, and shun the way to heaven as if it were the consummation of evil. Sinner, this is your own moral state. The picture gives only the naked facts of the case, without exaggeration. 3. This moral insanity is a state of unmingled wickedness. Special feature of it, which makes it a guilty state, is that it is altogether voluntary. It results not from the loss of reason, but from the abuse of reason. The will persists in acting against reason and conscience. Despite of the affirmations of reason and reckless of the admonitions of conscience, the sinner presses on in his career of rebellion against God and goodness. In such voluntary wickedness, must there not be intrinsic guilt? Besides, this action is oftentimes, deliberate. The man sins in his cool, deliberate moments, as well as in his excited moments. If he sins most overtly and boldly in his excited moments, he does not repent and change his position towards God in his deliberate moments, but virtually endorses then the hasty purposes of his more excited hours. This heightens his guilt. Again, his purposes of sin are obstinate and unyielding. In 10,000 ways, God is bringing influences to bear on his mind to change his purposes, but usually in vain. This career of sin is in violation of all his obligations. Who does not know this? The sinner never acts from right motives, never yields to the sway of a sense of obligation, never practically recognizes his obligation to love his neighbor as himself or to honor the Lord as God. It is a total rejection of both God's law and gospel. The law he will not obey. The gospel of pardon he will not accept. He seems determined to brave the omnipotence of Jehovah and dare his vengeance. Is he not mad upon his idols? Is it saying too much when the Bible affirms madness is in their heart while they live? Remarks. 1. Sinners strangely accuse saints of being mad and crazy. Just as soon as Christian people begin to act as if the truth they believe is reality, then wicked men cry out, "See, they are getting crazy." Commentary. Who does that sound like in Pilgrim's Progress? Mr. Worldly Wise Man, right? He lives in a world of subjective morality. He has the knowledge of the world. Capitalist, most likely, right? That's all he thinks about. It's Wall Street Journal. Hasn't read the Bible in years. So he looks at us, Bible believers, who dwell within biblical revelation. I don't want to say biblical ideology. You get my meaning, though. We dwell there, right? And they look at us and say we're crazy, right? Yeah. No, they're crazy. Because cemetery, gravestone, right? See, but they don't want to think about that. That's why they're crazy. Yet those very sinners admit the Bible to be true and admit those things which Christians believe as true to be really so. And further still, they admit that those Christians are doing only what they ought to do and only as themselves ought to act. Still, they charge them with insanity. It is curious that even those sinners themselves know these Christians to be the only rational men on earth. I can well recollect that I saw this plainly before my conversion. I knew then that the Christians were the only people in all the world who had any valid claim to be deemed sane. 2. If intellectual insanity be a shocking fact, how much more so is moral? I have referred to my first impressions at the sight of one who was intellectually insane, but a case of moral insanity ought to be deemed far more afflictive and astounding. Suppose the case of a Webster. His brain becomes softened. He is an idiot. There is not a man in all the land but would feel solemn. What? Daniel Webster? That great man an idiot? How have the mighty fallen? What a horrible sight. But how much more horrible to see him become a moral idiot. To see a selfish heart run riot with the clear decisions of his gigantic intellect. To see his moral principles fading away before the demands of selfish ambition. To see such a man become a drunkard, a debauchee, a loafer. If this were to occur in a Daniel Webster, how inexpressively shocking. Intellectual idiocy is not to be named in the comparison. 3. Although some sinners may be externally fair, and may seem to be amiable in temper and character, yet every real sinner is actually insane. In view of all these solemnities of eternity, he insists on being controlled only by the things of time. With the powers of an angel, he aims not above the low pursuits of a selfish heart. How must angels look on such a case? Eternity so vast, and its issues so dreadful, yet this sinner drives furiously to hell as if he were on the high road to heaven. And all this only because he is infatuated with the pleasures of sin for a season. At first view, he seems to have really made the mistake of hell for heaven, but on closer examination, you see it is no real mistake of the intellect. He knows very well the difference between hell and heaven, but he is practically deluding himself under the impulses of his mad heart. The mournful fact is, he loves sin, and after that he will go. Commentary. What sin is loved? What sin is loved? Well, earlier he picked on alcoholism, as he's in the habit of doing. Always this. So that's the main thing he's thinking about. Alcoholics love to have a drink. They just can't wait to have that next drink, right? So Finney and David Wilkerson are very similar, right? They think of sin in terms of teen challenge type sin, right? That's the way they think about it, okay? These really vice, that would be the word. When you hear Charles Finney say the word sin, what he usually means is what we today call vice, V-I-C-E, vice. That's what he means, all right? It's the really, really addicting sins, gambling addictions, porn addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, this stuff, these besetting vice type sins that keep people have a very hard time breaking away from. And he's saying the only answer is repentance. And that requires a whole lot of willpower and prayer, almost to the brink of your psychological state reaching its limit so that the Spirit of God can get a word in edgewise. And you come under true conviction and determination to let go of your sin. The mournful fact is, he says, that sinners love sin. They love their sin. And after that he will go. Alas, alas, so insane. He rushes greedily on his own damnation, just as if he were in pursuit of heaven. We shudder at the thought that any of our friends are becoming idiotic or lunatic, but this is not half so bad as to have one of them become wicked. Better have a whole family become idiotic than one of them become a hardened sinner. Indeed, the former, compared with the latter, is as nothing, for the idiot shall not always be so. Commentary. Did you hear that? A person experiences schizophrenia. He shall not always be so. It's temporary. Wonder how many marriages have been destroyed over something like that. A soldier comes back from the battlefield. He has PTSD. Might even go into a state of schizophrenia. Who knows? The shock, the shell shock, the stress was so intense, seeing his best friend's bodies explode in front of them. He ends up in the mental hospital. And the wife can't bear the idea, even though she was separated for several years as he was out in the battlefield fighting for our country. She could bear that better than to have him come home in a state of schizophrenia. And so he's put into the mental hospital for a month. And she divorces him. Why? Because she's selfish. She's scared. And also because she doesn't understand that most people, if treated properly, get cured from schizophrenia. It is temporary. But you see, what Finney is saying here is that most of the time, people who go to mental hospitals get cured if they're treated properly. And they come out and they're totally better. But a hardened sinner is morally mad. Madness is in the heart, not the head in this case. And nothing can be done for a person like that externally. They have to repent. They have to repent from their gut like they haven't repented ever in their whole life to break free of their hardness of heart. Okay? The former, compared with the latter, is as nothing, for the idiot shall not always be so. When this mortal is laid away in the grave the soul may look out again in the free air of liberty, as if it had never been immured in a dark prison, and the body, raised again, may bloom in external vigor and beauty. But alas, moral insanity only waxes worse and worse forever. The root of this being, not in a diseased brain, but in a diseased heart and soul. Death cannot cure it. The resurrection will only raise him to shame and everlasting contempt. Daniel 12:2. And the eternal world will only give scope to his madness to rage on with augmented vigor and wider sweep forever. Some persons are more afraid of being called insane than of being called wicked. Surely they show the fatal delusion that is on their hearts. Intellectual insanity is only pitiable, not disgraceful. But moral insanity is unspeakably disgraceful. None need wonder what God should say. Some shall arise to shame and everlasting contempt. Conversion to God is becoming morally sane. It consists in restoring the will and the affections to the just control of the intelligence, the reason, and the conscience, so as to put the man once more in harmony with himself, all his faculties adjusted to their true positions and proper functions. Sometimes persons who have become converted but not well established backslide into moral insanity, just as persons sometimes relapse into intellectual insanity after being apparently quite restored. This is a sad case and brings sorrow upon the hearts of friends. Yet in no case can it be so sad as a case of backsliding into moral insanity. An intellectual bedlam is a mournful place. How can the heart of any human sensibility contemplate such a scene without intense grief? Mark, as you pass through those halls, the traces of intellectual ruin. There is a noble-looking woman, perfectly sane. There is a man of splendid mind and bearing, all in ruins. How awful! Then, if this be so, what a place is hell! These intellectual bedlams are awful. How much more the moral bedlam? Suppose we go to Columbus and visit its lunatic asylum. Go round to all its wards and study the case of each inmate. Then we will go to Indiana, then to New York, and so through all the asylums of each several state. Then we will visit London and its asylum, where we may find as many insane as in all our Union. Would not this be a mournful scene? Would not you cry out long before we had finished, "Enough! Enough! How can I bear these sights of madmen? How can I endure to behold such desolation?" Suppose, then, we go next to the great moral bedlam of the universe, the hell of lost souls. For if men will make themselves mad, God must shut them up in one vast bedlam cell. Why should not he? The wheel of his empire demands that all the moral insanity of his kingdom should be withdrawn from the society of the holy and shut up alone and apart. There are those whose intellects are right, but whose hearts are all wrong. Ah, what a place must that be in which to spend one's eternity, the great madhouse of the universe. Commentary. And might I also say this, the great madhouse of the university. There's lots of men in the university whose intellects seem to be intact. They truly are moral schizophrenic. Sometimes sinners here, aware of their own insanity, get glimpses of this fearful state. I recollect that at one time I got this idea that Christians are the only persons who can claim to be rational. And then I asked myself, why should I the word is blurred out, I can't see it. Would it hurt me to obey God? Would it ruin my peace or damage my prospects for either this life or the next? Why do I go on so? I said to myself, I can give no account of it, only that I am mad. All that I can say is that my heart is set on iniquity, and I will not turn. Alas, poor maniac! Not unfortunate, but wicked. How many of you know this is your real case? Oh, young man, did your father think you were sane when he sent you here? You were so intellectually, perhaps, but not morally. As to your moral nature and functions, all was utterly deranged. My dear young friend, does your own moral course commend itself to your conscience and your reason? If not, what are you but a moral maniac? Young man, young woman, must you in truth write yourselves down, moral maniacs? Finally, the subject shows the importance of not quenching the spirit. This is God's agency for the cure of moral maniacs. Oh, if you put out his light from your souls, there remains to you only the blackness of darkness forever. Said a young man in Lane Seminary, just dying in his sins. Why did you not tell me there is such a thing as eternal damnation? Weld, why did you why did not you tell me? I did. Oh, I am going there. How can I die so? It's growing dark. Bring it a light. And he so passed away from this world of light and hope. O sinner, take care that you put not out the light which God has cast into your dark heart, lest, when you pass away, it shall grow dark to your soul at midday, the opening into the blackness of darkness forever.